Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us again on whatever platform you're listening on and wherever it is you're currently listening to this show at. Today, we're going to be talking about fitness and training and the right way for our players to be in shape, get in shape, stay in shape, and also make sure that they're getting the most out of their training regimen and their fitness regimen. I know as a coach, and I know with all the coaches that I talk to, it's a big concern with their players wanting to get the most out of their training, but not overtrain, and make sure that they're putting their bodies and their health in the right position to be successful. So to help discuss this topic, I'm joined by trainer, coach, player, and an individual who's just around the game in so many capacities, Coach Danielle Pray. Coach, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Coach?
I am doing quite well. Looking forward to getting into this topic because it's one that every single coach deals with, no matter what level, is making sure our players are healthy, fit, and getting the most out of their experience playing. So let's get into your journey, and it's still ongoing, and your journey's taken you a lot of places. So where has the game taken you? I know that you're playing, you're training, you're coaching. So go ahead with your basketball journey.
Yeah, just like you said, I'm still around the game. The phrase "ball is life" is definitely something that relates to me. Just to describe my journey, probably in a couple words, is adversity and challenges. I started off playing in high school, and I was actually a cheerleader. I was a cheerleader, and I turned into a basketball player senior year. Only played 1 year varsity, and I ended up being the starting shooting guard. We became conference and regional championship champs in 2013, and then we were semifinalists for Maryland States. Going into college, I would say that was probably the most challenging time of my life. Not gonna lie, it was a lot of transferring. I went to 3 schools. So for me, I felt like a lot of my seasons were not fulfilled or unsatisfied. And I think looking back at a lot of it, I think I lacked a lot of confidence, especially coming into the game really, really late.
Right.
And it wasn't like a hard work thing. It wasn't an attitude thing. I just did not understand the game at all. I'll play defense, I'll shoot the ball, but if you were telling me concepts, I could not understand that. So moving forward, ended up playing semi-pro in the area. I played for Maryland Jewels and Baltimore Lions, and two pretty good teams in the area. And I just love growing as a player as much as I love growing as a coach. And I think that being a coach has made me understand in more depth about the game. And of course, you as a coach as well, there's just things that you see as a coach now that you probably didn't see as a player. And if players were able to see those things, it's a game changer. So that's where it's taking me now. And now that I coach, I'm an assistant coach at the Murray School in DC. This would be my upcoming 4th year. And we have a pretty amazing group. And they just continue to be phenomenal, strong young women. I mean, we have a lot of freshmen that ended up going all the way to, we won conference last year. And this year we came up short in the playoffs, but still, it was a lot for 6 girls.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a lot. But my goals to be a coach is to coach and mentor players to push through the adversity and challenges that they face in their life. That could be physical and mental. Right. Basketball, you see a lot of physical and mental challenges that a lot of people don't talk about, especially at the college level. There's a lot of limits that get pushed. You have to balance life. And I just want to prepare players for that.
Yeah. No, that absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And that, there's so many difficult situations that you get put in the game of basketball, but learning how to deal with those situations and grow from them are just going to help you in so many ways in life once you're done playing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you started off your answer with saying ball is life, which I love it, which is great, and that's a great mindset to have in order to be really effective with this game. And one of the things that I know we as coaches sometimes worry about and are concerned about is that sometimes players when they're playing basketball, that's kind of all they see themselves as. They see themselves as a basketball player, and that's like their whole identity, and that's completely like who they are. But how has basketball kind of helped you in other areas of your life so that there's more to your identity and more to who you are than just being a basketball player? And then also, is that something that you try to work with your girls so that they're not just wrapped up in this one single-minded identity and they see themselves as more than that?
So with basketball, I think of it not to describe me as an individual, but the lifestyle that I live. So with basketball, I've learned a lot of leadership. I've learned a lot of commitment, perseverance, resilience. And with that, I've taken it into other aspects of my life. So I'm doing personal training. In basketball, you're pretty much your own brand. And not trying to say you're trying to sell yourself, but when you're presenting yourself to a coach, you want to be able to be the best person that you can be and how you can affect in a positive way their own team. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I use basketball as my own brand. What are my strengths and what do I bring to the table? My experiences is what I bring to the table. The things that I have gone through, I bring that to the table, and using that in, like you said, in everyday life. Basketball has definitely been a networking and connection thing as well. I don't think that I would have known half of the people that I know right now if it wasn't for basketball. And for me, my end goal is to be a physical therapist. So as you can see, the connection between sports in that field is huge.
Yeah.
And another thing that players need to think about is basketball, it's going to stop dribbling. And not everyone goes to the pros. Not everyone goes overseas. So you have to have some type of goal behind that as well. So yeah, that's pretty much what I get out of basketball, and it's brought me to my passion and purpose to help others realize that.
Yeah. Well, it's a message that I think every player or every coach, they all say it, that eventually the ball like stops bouncing. Eventually you move on
It's so
in your life.
cliche.
Yeah,
It's
well,
cliche.
but it's cliche for a reason, because it's true. Even the players who play professionally, eventually they're going to stop, and eventually they're going to have a whole lot of life still ahead of them. And then it's like
Right.
who you are. And I think what you mentioned is a really, really great point about the connections that you make with people through the game, and staying in touch with those people, staying connected. And maybe your journey isn't going to take you anywhere with basketball, but if you still are connected with people and you still have those friendships, you have no idea what doors that might open for you. Right.
Even with old coaches, I still keep in contact with my high school coaches.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's a huge connection.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that you never know when you might need that door opened, or you never know when you might need a reference, or somebody who might know somebody, or a coach who might know somebody, in all facets of life. And so having those communication skills, really forming those relationships, and I think that it is really important for players who are, they take it really seriously, which is great. You should be taking your sport really seriously, but at the same time making sure that like, okay, what else am I getting out of this? Like you said, am I getting determination, communication, teamwork? And I think all of those things, like you mentioned, are things that you're keeping in mind, and that basketball has helped you for whatever that next chapter of your life is going to be.
Right. And just to add on to it, I mean, if you asked me in college if I wanted to coach, I probably would have told you no, just because I did not want to be around the game during college. But once I got out, it was just something I felt like I was missing a part. if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like I still need to be around the game. And that's how I really got into coaching. It was an opportunity, and opportunities kept just piling and piling up around basketball and mentoring people. So that's how I kind of came around my passion and
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah, and that's something kind of great to keep in mind is like when you're done playing, if you still like like the game, love the game, and want to give back in
Mm-hmm.
some way, like coaching is a great way to do it. And I've talked to many coaches who will tell you that if any of their former players, if they ever want to come back and like work with them and coach with them, like every coach like loves that when their former players
Right.
get into it and still are a part of the game that way. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So you talked about kind of your aspirations about personal training and fitness in general, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on today, kind of in general, and then also if in the context of basketball, because that's what you do and that's what this show is about. So with basketball and personal training and fitness, you know, every sport and activity has different areas that they focus on, different muscles, tendons, things like that. When it comes to training and fitness for basketball and basketball players, what are the areas of focus that you think are most important and that basketball players definitely have to make sure that they're training and working on and being mindful of?
Yep. So, with basketball, it's a full body sport. You really have to work all of your muscles together. Um, there are types of workouts that I would say need to be that you need to focus on in your training. Um, and that includes plyometrics, which involves a lot of working on explosiveness, jumping. And what I like about plyometrics is it's about your landing form as well. With basketball, you're going for rebounds, you're going up for layups. And when you come down, a lot of injuries come from that. So with plyometrics, you're working on landing. And even if it's a little bit off balance, you're able to still be stable enough that it's not tweaking your ankle or something with your knee.
Right.
Um, Strength training is a big one too that helps prevention of injury, and as well as explosiveness and speed and not being pushed down when you're going to the rack. I focus highly on strength training a lot because with injuries going on right now, a lot of it is because of weak muscles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, and go ahead.
No, so well, as you were talking, it made me think because I was somebody who played, I had terrible ankles because I would always sprain my ankles and
Mm-hmm.
I would never take care of them, and so that's one of the biggest injuries that I think we have is players who come down bad, or that they come down wrong, or I've seen a lot where players come down with all of their weight on one leg, and then things end up happening from there. So has that been something that you've noticed? Do you have like players or people that you've trained who talk about how they have ankle issues or knee problems? Is that just something that you've seen as well?
A lot of times, like even when I was in school. And I want to say that I'm thankful enough to have trainers when I was growing up
Hmm.
that focused on form, rather than increasing weights or anything like that. Form was the biggest thing, and that's something that I focus on a lot when I'm training people, is making sure your form is correct, even when it comes down to running, because the way you run can affect your knees, can affect your ankles, can affect your back, even if you're running a certain way.
So some people might not even be thinking about that. Well, what is proper form when you run? What is proper form with running? And I guess the other end of that is what is improper form that you've seen.
It also depends on your body type.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that pronate or um, that pronate their feet. So when they do that, they might have more shin splints, or they might have more knee problems because they're putting so much stress on that area with those muscles that they're pulling.
Hmm.
Um, Proper form for it's it's hard to explain like through through here, but because I'm a very visual person.
Yeah. Right.
But um, making sure that your chest is out and you're not hunched over.
Hmm.
A lot of times you see bad form with arms. Um, they should be at a 90-degree angle the whole time you're running, and they should be going in an alternating fashion. So
Hmm.
left arm front, right arm back. Um, And with also the lower body, you might see people with it's like when your knees go in like pigeon-toed, or
Hmm.
if they're bow-legged, you might see them run a little bit differently.
Yeah.
The main focus is try to keep your feet not pointed, but facing straight.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, those are just little things that you can focus on when you're running to make sure that you're doing the perfect form. There are also drills that you can do that help that as well, so that it's not something that you're constantly thinking about, and it's just automatic for you to do it.
Right, because in a game, it's so much stop start. You're just
Hmm.
going, you're running, you're sprinting. You don't have time to really necessarily think about what your form is and everything. You just have to kind of have it down already so that you can just jump into action and just know that you're doing it right without even having to think about it in the first place. So,
Yeah, but same thing with jumping as well. A lot of people bring in their knees, go inward, which is
hmm.
very bad for your knees.
Hmm.
And just keeping them outward, and even just when you're squatting or doing lunges, just making sure they stay over the foot, but not over, it's over top of the foot, but not going too far out from
Right, right,
forward.
right. And yeah, it's something that I think we need to just make sure that we're really thinking about because of how much jumping there is and how much running there is. And every time that
Hmm.
there's a player jumping and everything for a rebound, that they got to land and they got to come down and what that looks like, especially when, and you could speak to this too, when there's a lot of bodies everywhere and they might not necessarily have the best landing spot to get in, is just making sure that they're landing
Oh
correctly every
yeah.
time. And have you,
Yep.
yeah, have you played with or seen a lot of players too that have a lot of knee issues as well? Is that something that you've encountered?
Yes.
Mhm.
There are, because like I said in the beginning, my team had only about 6, 7 girls
Yep.
this past season. They were doing a lot of overuse, and they had a lot of knee problems, shin splints, hamstrings, um, and they were getting proper strength training and everything.
Hmm.
But I think a lot of it is what they were doing prior to coming into high school and what type of training they were doing then, because those are the habits that pretty much make you the player that you are.
Yeah. And so you
Um,
you mentioned about overuse, and I think that that's a concern that I I know I've had it before, and some other coaches do, where players are trying to they're trying to do too much to the point where their body isn't allowed to recover and isn't allowed to rest. So how important is
mhm.
that to you in when you're doing your training or your own personal training in terms of making sure that you have enough time to rest and recover and just let your body repair?
It's huge. Um, you can't give 100% every day if you're doing it every day. Um, a lot of coaches probably say, or players too, they say no days off, which I was a firm believer of that at first, but now seeing how much basketball is now is all year round.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, like when we were younger, we probably had like probably 2 to 3 weeks between our regular season and our AAU season. Now it's literally right when your regular season ends, you're right into AAU.
Yeah.
Um, so with that, I mean, your time span to rest is probably like not even 24 hours, depending on what kind of team you're on, or if
Mhm.
you're even doing outside training, including that.
Right.
But it's huge. And what I like to do is I give them at least 1 to 2 days, just depending on how extraneous the workout was,
Mhm.
and what else they also got going on. So I think as coaches, we need to be more understanding of players' outside activities. If they play for other teams, modify and adjust to whatever curricular activities that they have going on, because it's not going to help us as coaches or them if they're not coming with the full energy that they need.
Right. Yeah. And we want, and to me also as a coach, I want to just give my players a break just because I don't want them to be thinking about basketball if I have the choice. If they can take a couple days away, if
Hmm.
possible, to not even think about the game and just recharge. I think one of the things that and you may have seen this or you may work with players that deal with this is one of the things that I know I'm always worried about is just burnout and players who just play so much and they focus so much on basketball all the time that they kind of lose why they love playing it in the first place, just because they're going way too hard all the time.
Yep. I see it a lot, and I actually have a lot of teammates who burned out from college just because of that. And I think that's like one of the pros of me like starting late, because I'm not burnt out yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But as a player, the way I do my workouts is I'll work out probably 1 to 3 times a day, but those workouts aren't 2 to 3 hours each. So in the morning, I'll probably run like a mile, and then later on in the day, I'll go shoot. So it's more spaced out rather than back to back to back.
Right.
And I think that's better too, because a lot of people talk about lifting and shooting right after, and how that affects their shot and everything like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, that I think well, and then that'll be something else that we can touch on is how much, in terms of training and in terms of working out and fitness, there's a certain limit to how effective that session is going to be. And then if you just keep going, you're just going to see negative results or not see what you want. So when you're training in your kind of like fitness regimen, is there like a certain kind of time spot for you where you're like, okay, like this is like the perfect amount of time, because anything more than that just isn't going to have a good result for me?
Usually around an hour to an hour 15, hour 30, just depending on what we're doing. I like to do a lot of efficient drills where a lot of people do 1,000 shots a day, but how many of those 1,000 shots are you actually making? For me, I like to do more shots in a row. So you have to make this amount of shots in a row in order to be done, rather than just continuously shooting shots and not getting really an outcome other than maybe just throwing it up.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people probably do when they start getting tired.
Yeah.
For me, I like to do more, it's not really perfection, but you're working towards making shots and focusing on making the shots rather than just the muscle memory of just doing whatever. A lot of people have their different ways of doing it too. I just think that adding that in rather than just shooting is more efficient and more effective.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk about shooting, especially in the ways to do that the best. I know that there's so many different methods out there, but I think it is important to make sure that you're doing shots that are meaningful. You have meaningful goals that you're setting for yourself, and you're not, like you said, just shooting just to shoot, especially if like your form is going to be really bad because you're really exhausted and really tired, and then it's just not really that authentic, and just making sure that it's a good use of your time, especially if you're doing things like shooting, right? So how much has your training and like the way that you not only train yourself but train others kind of come from your experience playing? And what I mean by that is, like, have you in your playing experience noticed, like in the middle of a game or towards the end of the game, that like this is something that I'm going to want to get better at so that I don't have this feeling the next time I play? How much have you kind of diagnosed your training based on how you felt when you've been playing?
A lot of it has been based on how I've played. I'm 5'2", playing basketball, so I deal with, and I have definitely Napoleon syndrome when I go to the rack. Not gonna lie on that part. And a lot of things that I implement is working on realistic things. So if your defender's here, what are you gonna do? Or it's also working on your weaknesses. For me, it's going to the rack and finishing. And that's actually something a lot of people struggle with as well. And for what I do is, why? Is it because you're not getting you're not flicking the ball hard enough to get up there? Is it you're not even looking? Like, that's what I like to do, like with my training. And make sure that players understand that, so that in the game they also know that too. And I actually live by the motto, next play.
Yeah. And
with next play, it's more than just moving on to the next play. You're moving on, but you're also trying to do something different. It's literally definition of insanity to do the same thing over and over and expect to get the same outcome. Probably heard that before.
Yep.
So, and that was something like you said, from my own experiences that I've implemented into my training. So for me in college and in high school, I had a hard time not getting over that play. And I always heard next play. I just never really thought of it as just move on. Like I thought it was just, get over it.
Right.
Get over it. We're still in the game. But now I'm looking at more in depth, and it's not just move on. It's what can you do to get a better result?
Yeah.
But yeah, in a game, I mean, you can't think that fast, but I mean, you can make a mental note of that so that when you're out of the game, you can watch the film, which a lot of people, that's another thing that I like to implement into my training is watching film. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention that, we can talk a lot about the physical training and the athletic training and the fitness elements of everything. But at the same time, you do have to put that together with the mental aspect as well, as being able to apply all of those things, and that you can be the most, fit, in shape person that there is on the court. But if you're mentally not prepared, or if you haven't mentally worked out, then a lot of it might not really matter, all of the physical stuff that you're doing, right?
I mean, basketball is pretty much a mental game. So
yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned that you're 5'2", and talking about going to the rack and going hard. And I think that one of the things that players, especially if they're smaller, they worry about is they worry about contact, and they worry about somebody a lot bigger than them just colliding them, hitting them, injuries and things like that. And so is that something that you were just able to sort of like get over, or is it a thing where you're going to be the one trying to create the contact, or like how is that kind of developed in terms of your training so that you're driving hard and you're not like worried about getting hit or collided in by somebody like bigger than you?
It really it depends. That's where a lot of film comes into place for me. Is I look at a lot of film when I was playing, or even just playing pickup or something. I'll record it and just see what I did and see what I could have done, or if there was something else, if I could have just shot the ball sooner. Being shorter, you have to be able to react faster. So if they reach, that's your moment to go past them. When you're going to the basket, a lot of times, like you said, we're afraid of contact. And you just can't be afraid. 9 out of 10 times when you're going in and you're afraid of contact, you're missing the shot and you're not even getting fouled hard enough. So the ref doesn't even call it. So just going in hard and initiating the contact, you don't want to do it too much where you're getting the shoulder call or like an elbow call for a charge. But what I do is I put my off ball hand in the way of where they might be trying to block my shot. And it sounds unorthodox, but I'm really just shooting. Well, I mean, most people shoot their layups with one hand, but I shoot with just one hand, so that the other hand is protecting me, especially myself, but also the ball from getting blocked. And a lot of times that gets you a foul call because they have to reach around your arm to get to the ball. Pump fakes are huge too. When you're shorter, pump fakes are very, very essential.
Yeah. No, I could imagine you're going to have to probably get a little creative and use a little bit of little trickery and mental game too to kind of make sure that you're getting the shot where you want, or faking somebody. And like you said, a lot of it too is just coming down to film and watching tendencies and just watching what do players tend to do, like what can I do in this situation, how do most players react, like you said, with the reaching in if you have your off ball hand a certain way. So I think it is important that players see themselves and kind of see what they're doing, so that way they can kind of understand, okay, here's the adjustment that I need to make. Right.
And I think another pro of just playing, being still a player but also a coach, has helped a lot because the game is constantly changing. So as a coach, I can see what, I guess not trending, but I mean, a lot of people like to do like the fillet layups and,
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
know, spin the ball more so that it can go in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Those type of things, that's stuff that I've been learning how to do too as an
Yeah,
older person.
yeah, yeah.
But it's been interesting and being able to use that as well. Because I mean that helps with shorter people too, is being able to do those types of things so that you're not getting your shot blocked or you're not getting fouled as much.
Right. Yeah. That's there's. I think it is really important that we kind of always kind of study up on those things and study up on like new things that are being like talked about or new ways of shooting or finishing, and just sort of like you said, if you are still playing, even if it is just recreationally, you know, trying them out yourself, like seeing what it looks
Right.
like, and yeah, that way you're going to be able to kind of teach that to your players. So
Yeah.
another area that I feel like there is just so many different ways to do it, and I feel like there's so many coaches who will tell you about this is the way that we do it because this is what's been best for us is about stretching, and so what in your experience, not only as playing but as training and as coaching, have you found to be the most effective ways to stretch, get loose, and get warmed up?
Bands. Bands have been a huge one. Like those stretching bands.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that has been a big one. And also stretching is not just the only way to get um flexibility. Drills such as like the fire hydrants, that helps with hip flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what else? Surprisingly, doing more dynamic things like jump squats and stuff. That's actually helping your body get loose as well. Um, in warm ups, I like to do a lot of dynamic things that keep your body moving, but you're also stretching as well.
Right. Right. So yeah, I think that that's something that I feel like is becoming more common or universally accepted, is the idea of like dynamic stretching, and to
Hmm.
keep yourself moving and not necessarily do things stationary. And so um, I know that basketball, like it's a full body experience because you're using everything, you're using all your muscles. But I think one of the things that you mentioned that sometimes we don't think about is your hips,
Hmm.
and the importance of that. So in your experience, what has been the benefit of making sure that you're stretching your hips, and like what benefit does it have to make sure that your hips are loose and warmed up when you're going to play?
Well, anatomy wise, your hip is connected to your lower body and your upper. So
Hmm.
if your hip is tight, you might be having back problems. If your hip is tight, it's actually connected to your knee. So that might be what's causing your knee problems because it's having to pull because it's so tight.
Hmm.
Um, I've actually strained my hip flexors before, and it's not fun at all. So when your hips are tight, you can't run. Um, as you really can't run, and it's hard to even jog sometimes, just depending on how severe it is.
Hmm.
Jumping involves your hips. Literally everything you do involves your hips. So
Hmm.
if you're not, if you don't have full range of motion on your hips, what can you actually do?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and they're starting to see now a lot of explosiveness is with hips. Um, Trying to go change of speeds. That's a lot of hips too.
Right, right. And yeah, I mean, it is, when you think about it, it is all connected. And maybe sometimes we don't emphasize it, or players don't think about it as much because it's not necessarily like a muscle necessarily that you're going to see like
Yep.
get bigger or something like that you would if like your arms or legs. But if
Yep.
all your movement and rotation is kind of going with your hips, and that just making sure that, like you said, if it's all connected, then you need to make sure that that's not tight so that everything else can work the way that it needs to.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing defense, you can't turn fast enough if your hips aren't loose enough.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so it's really, and like you said, like a lot of people emphasize arms and legs. which those are fine, but it's really your core and your hips that's the main thing that a lot of players actually need to focus on. If you don't have a solid core, you don't have good balance.
Right. And so I wanna touch on that because we haven't really touched on much on upper body and arms and things like that. And so from your experience of just playing and in training, do you find that there's an overemphasis on things with the upper body? Do you think that it's enough? Like what is kind of uh the in terms of time, spending time working on like your upper body, like your arms and things like that, how much time should be dedicated to that versus your things like your legs, your hips and muscles on that area?
Um, I've been around a lot of different players. I've been around the players that solely focused on arms and think that being buff and doing curls is the way to go. Um, I've been around players who thought doing squats and just focusing on lower body was the way to go. Um, and you really have to have a good balance. And it's not just lifting, it's how are you lifting. As a basketball player, you're doing a lot of pushing and a lot of pushing movements, like when you're passing the ball, when you're shooting the ball, when you got to get off the floor from falling or to get back up and get back into the play. So you just have to make sure you're doing exercises that reflect those type of movements.
Hmm. And so
Um,
with that then, are there then some exercises or some machines that you think are more efficient for players to be doing versus other ones that aren't going to have as much benefit for players on the court?
um, a lot of times, I mean, there you can do most of the exercises, but I think the ones that really would reflect what you need to do in the game are things like medicine ball throws.
Hmm.
You're working on those passes while strengthening, and you're working on getting when you're strengthening that. I mean, you can pass it further, you can pass it faster.
Mm.
Um, there's also um, kettlebells are pretty good too. I'm not a big fan of like the bar. um, maybe it's just me personally, but I'm not a big fan of that. I like more like dumbbells and kettlebells and like I said, like medicine balls because you can be more active with it.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah.
So if I'm thinking of this correctly, your philosophy is more of when it comes to working out is what muscle am I working out and what is this muscle going to do for me when I'm on the court? And that's kind of why you mentioned like the pushing and pulling.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Correct.
Yeah. And so I think that would be a good thing to kind of keep in mind for, some players who might like you said, live at the bar or some of these other things. Not that they aren't useful, but at the same time, it's almost like we may want to have a conversation with our players to think like, okay, this exercise you want to do, that's
Mm-hmm.
great, do it, but what is it working on and what is it going to help you get better at on the court? Because then there's kind of like a mental aspect for then players to kind of think about their routine and why they're working out the muscles that they are.
Yeah, I mean, everyone can get online and look up workouts and do them, but how is that helping you?
Hmm.
And everyone needs something different. That's where trainers come in. That's where coaches come in, because they know they've been in the game, they've been in that situation, or they're knowledgeable about it, so they know what exactly each individual probably need.
Yeah, and that's why I probably emphasize more than some about ankles and everything like that, because my ankles are probably still bad because I didn't take care of them and didn't take care of. I would just sprain them all the time, and like I said, it was just one of those things I didn't really take seriously, and then it's like, oh well, probably should have done that. But
Yeah, I mean, if
go ahead.
you, I don't know if you like it. Well, LeBron, if you take him for example, I think he did an interview and he talked about how much money he spends on investing on his rehab and just resting and getting his body uh, restored.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think it was like it was over thousands of dollars.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense because nothing else is gonna really happen on the court if you don't have your health and your fitness and everything taken care of. You got to have that down before you can really do much else on the court. So yeah, I mean that makes sense to
Yeah.
me.
I mean, just thinking about it as like, would you rather do the exercises to prevent something or do the exercises because you are trying to rehab something?
Yeah, I can imagine the ones for prevention are a lot more fun and a lot less stressful than somebody trying to rehab a ankle or a knee or something like that. Because yeah, then I can imagine, I'm sure you know this too, that those players who are like rehabbing an injury, like they're probably
It's
sometimes
awful.
frustrated, it's
It's
painful, I'm
awful.
sure, and then even after you recover, there's still possibly a bit of a mental block that you have to make sure that you get over and that you're not like thinking about it, because if you think about it too much, I mean that's not going to be good either.
Yeah, and I mean that's also another thing that a lot of individuals fail to realize too is just like recovery time. A
Yeah.
lot of people are so anxious to get back, and once they get back, boom, like another injury just happened because you didn't allow your body to rest or you weren't properly resting
Hmm.
or doing the workouts you're supposed to do to rehab.
Yeah.
That's a
And
huge one that I see a lot.
right, and as you mentioned, with everything being connected, if you don't let one body part heal the way it should, then that might put a lot of strain on another body part that's going to get hurt, and then next thing you know, you have all these things that are built up as injuries just because that
Yep.
one you didn't let recover. Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
Because if you have one injury, I mean, everything else has to compensate, and then everything else is overworking, like you said.
hmm And so you mentioned about the recovery and the rest element, and so one of the topics that I know I either go to workshops on, or I have people who give presentations on to the players, is making sure that their relationship with working out is a healthy one. And so I want to touch on that first, about what what is kind of a healthy relationship in regards to working out, fitness, and diet like that, and then at what point could it possibly become like too much, where a player is like too obsessed and they're going too far to the point where that relationship with like working out and fitness isn't healthy anymore?
Mhm. Um, a healthy one would, first of all, it would involve just your mindset. I mean, if you're going in just saying like, "Oh, I have to work out today," you're probably not gonna get anything done out of that.
Mm,
Um, as far as unhealthy, you see it a lot probably when someone's trying to prepare for tryouts or they got a huge game coming up and they're overdoing it because they think that that's going to get them better results. No, keep the constant whatever you have been doing, and maybe eventually do baby steps into it, like adding something in there, like weights or going a little bit longer. Um, but I think that's like one of the biggest unhealthy things that we see a lot is just, like you said, being obsessed with working out because they're trying to get a certain result or success.
hmm And so, do you, in your talking to you as a coach now, is that something that you have to be aware about with your players? Have you kind of had to talk to them about their relationship, like with working out, or have you just trusted them that they're doing their routine and they're doing what they need to do? Because as a coach, you don't want to, now I know I don't want to like overemphasize it to the point where like my girls are gonna like start getting like worried and nervous and think that they have to be
Hmm.
working out all the time, but at the same time also like holding them accountable. So I guess what I'm asking, in your conversations that you're having with your girls, how does that work with you kind of promoting it, making sure that they're staying fit without them like becoming too worried that like it's super super important to you?
Um, I think that the way that I present it to them is saying that you can always go a little bit you so like after practices, you can
Hmm.
put up shots. Um, I'm not going to sit here and say you should sit here all night and shoot shots until you make them, but work on something that you didn't do well in practice for like 30 minutes. Um, or if you have some free, I mean, with quarantine, if you have some free time, work on your ball handling for like 10 minutes. I don't think that I would really be overly on them about, making sure that they're not working out too much or anything like that, because at the end of the day, they're gonna do what they want to do. They're their own people.
Yep.
And the only thing, you can bring them to the water, but you can't make them drink it. So I can tell them all day long, don't overwork yourself. And sometimes like they end up still doing it, and sometimes it just takes them that learning lesson to do that.
Right.
And I mean, me as a young coach, I'm still trying to figure out like those types of ways to talk to kids. But the biggest thing is I would say things that I would want to hear from my coach, that I would have wanted when I was their age.
Yeah.
So the encouragement, but also being able to tell them like, look, like you're doing this well. So kind of just doing like a positive and negative kind of thing.
Right.
Whereas they know that they have something to work on, but they also know that they're doing something right. So they're not overly obsessed with trying to do something right.
Yeah. And I think that's important to kind of think, especially for those who have played, is think about, what worked for you, like what were the messages that you needed to hear, and there's trial and error with it, because every player is different. Your relationship of every player is going to be different, but that is a good starting point to kind of reflect on what worked with you. And then to kind of add on to that, you mentioned about how, at a certain point, kids are going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to kind of do their own thing to a certain extent. And so how does that same approach kind of work in terms of dieting, where like what the players are eating? Is that something that you even try to get into too much with them, or how does that conversation of like nutrition and dieting and things like that work as well? Because I know that sometimes I have no idea what like my girls eat and things like that, and so I'm just curious kind of what your thoughts are on that.
I've been asked by some of the girls like what to eat and everything. Me personally, because I am a trainer, I don't want to give information that's probably false, because I don't really know fully like their diet restrictions or if they have certain backgrounds. But I would tell them things that I would suggest. So making sure the night before game, carb up so that you're not too tired in the middle of the game. Making sure you're drinking water. Water is like the biggest thing that it sounds basic, but a lot of people fail to do, even myself.
Oh yeah. And we see it all the time. Yep. Keep going.
Yep. When you're younger, you really don't see like junk food and everything being such a bad thing, because you're young. You're just like, oh, I'm just gonna, it's just gonna, it's fine. But when you're older, you definitely feel those, you feel the outcome of that, of just eating just like French fries or something. So I would tell them those types of things. Like, you should probably go ahead and start eating a healthy lifestyle right now. But like we said, like they're kids. They're going to eat that. I think just them knowing, being more knowledgeable of what they can get out of eating healthy is probably the better way to go about it. Like just telling them the information about how the carbs and the proteins that you eat actually are restoring your muscles and, give you more energy, kind of stuff.
Well, I think it goes back to something that we talked about how you can kind of like, when you're playing, if you're gonna like see yourself on film, then you can notice things, because the film doesn't lie. But at the same time, if players aren't taking care of themselves with their diet and things like that, I mean, that's going to show up in games too. Like that's going to be something that it might not be the first thing, but if a player is like tired to the point where like you're going to have to take them out or this, that, or the other, like those are going to be like authentic examples of like, well, here's probably why you need to make sure you're getting a good night's sleep. And here's why you got to make sure that you're eating properly. And then, well, I just said it. So about sleep, another thing that you can't, you can't necessarily police, because kids are going to kind of go to bed whenever they go to bed. But is that, if you had or kind of noticed in your interactions with some of your players that like they're just not sleeping that much? Because I know I have, so I'm just curious if that's something that you've seen as well.
Just like lack of sleep and how that affects their performance.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. So I actually work as a sleep tech as well. So I understand how important sleep is, and your body can't recover if you don't get the right amount of sleep. So if you're trying to go into the next day with 2-3 hours of sleep because you wanted to stay up until 2-3 in the morning, you're not going to get anything out. You're not going to be performing at your best. Mentally too. I mean, mentally, if you don't sleep well enough, you actually have a lot of memory problems, frustration, and a lot of focus problems as well.
Right. And it comes back to also that time, and you can speak to it too, about just getting proper rest. Is it just gives your body time to like recover and repair, and that it needs enough time to do that.
Yep. And I mean, a lot of times when players, they think they're like, oh, it's just one time, but you never know what type of opportunities you're going to get that next day, and you're not even ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Or if you go out and you do play on an empty stomach, who knows like what might happen if you pass out or anything. It's just those types of things. I mean, as a kid and being younger, you don't think about that. But I think like as coaches, if we tell them, instead of just telling them the reasoning why, instead of just telling them like, hey, like you need to eat better, or hey, you need to get this sleep, I think they'll understand more.
Right. I think that it sometimes feels like it's almost above and beyond what we do as coaches, but I think that we have to understand that our players might not necessarily understand like things about like what sleep can do for you, or like what certain types of foods like do for you, like you mentioned about carbs and things like that, and that it's part of like it's like a fitness education that kind of goes with this too, and a nutritional education, and that you and I or any coach just can't assume that like our players know these things. Like sometimes they have to be taught them.
Yep. I mean, everyone comes from different households, different types of families. And I mean, to one family, they might eat everything organic already, and, they're living a healthy lifestyle already. But it might be to another person, maybe financially, they just can't afford that type of stuff. So they never knew that type of lifestyle.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely is something that we most times assume that people know these things, but don't actually, like you said, but they don't.
Yeah, and if we want to make sure that they're aware of it, like make sure that we talk about it, and if we talk about it with them, even if they do know it, if we mention it, at least they know it's important to us, like it matters to us that this is happening. And so it's like, oh well, my coach is like talking about like sleep and nutrition and fitness. These are things that are probably important to them, so I should make sure that I'm getting enough sleep and eating well and staying in shape and things like that. And so I think with all coaches, the things that you promote and the things that you encourage are going to be the things that your players hear, and hopefully like they'll act accordingly if they know it's important to you as a coach, right?
Yeah, I mean, as coaches, you're not just molding them into, like we talked about before, they're not just basketball players. You're molding a better life for them, so that they understand things and that they're better prepared for other things in life.
Yeah, 100%, right. And even if it's something like fitness or something about emotional or something about mental, like you never know, but you're always teaching, and there's always things that you're teaching through the game that are just so much more than just basketball itself, right? You're 100%. So this is great, and there's some really good information here. So Coach, to wrap up, what I want to do is I want to have you share a moment in your coaching career that has stuck with you and had a really big impact on you as a coach. I know it's hard probably to choose one.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because like I said before, I didn't even expect myself to be coaching. it was just an opportunity, and I was just like, out of college, I was like, why not?
Mm-hmm.
But I would say I would probably last year when we lost in the playoffs for DC States.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, I realized that I was impacting them. And I was making, and we were creating leaders. A lot of them on the team, like that was like a turning point for them. They were like, we really got to get our stuff together if we really want to win. And it was just like, I saw that fire that I have in myself for them. It started to reflect them personally.
Yeah.
Like, you know, as coaches, like you get frustrated because you're just like, geez, like I wish I was in their spot right now. But you can't. Like they have to be their own players. Like you can only do but so much as a coach. But it was in that moment I realized how much I was impacting them and how much they meant to me as players as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was like the first time I felt like emotional as a coach. But yeah, it's impacting lives. That definitely is the most memorable, and making them better people.
Well, that's so like true, that experience that you have, and that we go through all of this with preseason tryouts, coaching, where we're just in it, and then all of a sudden, like whenever that's done, then you can kind of take a step back and realize like, whoa, like we did a lot here. Like I had an impact on these kids, and they did with me. And you know, sometimes it takes that like moment at the end to kind of like really let it all like sink in. So yeah, absolutely. I think we've all been there, and it's a really powerful one. It really kind of makes you realize, you know, how much of an impact you're having, and how much not only do you mean to them, but they mean to you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. So to wrap up, what I give every guest is I give what I call my 60-second soapbox, where I let them speak about any idea that you think is really important, a closing idea, something you want to re-emphasize, just kind of a final thought that you want our listeners to hear. So Coach, I'm going to give you the floor. Go ahead.
Oh man. Honestly, to all players, like I mentioned before, you got to have a next play mentality. You make mistakes, so what? Turnovers, bad passes, everyone does it. It's what you do afterwards. For me, I think what people need to understand is the next play is the most important play. And that goes for anything. I mean, your dreams and goals, if you succeeded at a goal, what are you going to do now? And the way I go about my goals is I write it down somewhere that I usually will see it every day, or maybe make a reminder on my phone. Such as, I mean, when I was in school, I'm playing college basketball. Not saying I'm going to, but affirming it that you are going to do it.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, how are you going to do it? And whether you can say, I'm going to play college basketball by being the hardest worker on my team. I'm playing college basketball by being the best shooter. Whatever that is, affirm that again and write it down. We don't realize how powerful our words are, and how that actually can change our whole mentality, and our motivation for things as well. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I got.
Well, I really like the idea of just writing it down. I think sometimes it could just be like a lot more real, and a lot more like, oh, like this is important to me. I can see it in my own writing. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
great, you know. And I think that it's good to, like, we have a lot of these like thoughts and goals and things that we want to get to, but then sometimes it's important to have it be spoken to somebody, or write it down somewhere as a kind of a reminder. And so yeah, I think that
Yep.
would be really powerful. Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you again for joining us, and talking about like your playing, and about fitness, and all the things that go into that. I think it's just really important that we keep that in mind as coaches going forward, about how we're developing our players beyond just being basketball players, but in their fitness journey and their life journey. So Coach Pray, thank you for spending some time. Good luck with coaching, good luck with training, good luck with playing, good luck with everything going forward.
Good luck to you too, Coach Hernandez. And thank you so much for having me come on here.
Thank you. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. So thank you guys for listening. Hopefully this was informative and hopefully you can use this information going forward. So thank you guys. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.